Welcome back to episode 29 of the Avery Adventures podcast. First, I want to thank everybody who reached out for Tanya, who had hip surgery a couple weeks ago. She's doing great. Tomorrow she starts walking, and that means me and Lane can go elk and antelope hunting next week. So it's the first time in a long time that I haven't bow hunted for elk, so I'm itching to get back out there. But back on to Tanya's deal. She's doing great. Starts walking tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. As always, this episode is brought to you by mountainops.com. You can get 20% off by using the code FATKID at checkout at mountainops.com. We'd really appreciate it. We're still giving away a $100 gift certificate every episode. And this week, this winner is Number One Trail Girl. So Number One Trail Girl, thanks for leaving a review on iTunes. Please get a hold of us at Tanya or Ryan at averyadventures.com and we'll get you that gift card. We're also brought to you by rockslide.com. I get gear questions every day, and 99% of them can be answered if you just go to the forums or rockslide.com and ask your questions. Super knowledgeable people, super nice. We don't allow a lot of bullshit on there, so go check it out. One more thing before I get into who the guest is we did a podcast on backcountry communication devices, and we kind of knocked on the Globustar. And we got some feedback from people that say, I don't know what you're talking about. The Globustar is awesome. Well, all we're going to relay on this podcast ever is our experiences. So we're not trying to say the Globustar doesn't work for you. It did work for me in Alaska if you listen to this episode, but in Idaho and Montana, southern Idaho, it didn't work for shit. So we're just going to tell you our experiences. You can take that for what it's worth. We're not trying to sell anybody on any certain product. The Iridium kicked the shit out of the Globustar in every way, shape, or form outside of Alaska, which they told us it wouldn't work in Alaska. So that's just our experiences, and that's what we're going to tell you on each and every episode. Hope that clears that up. On this episode, I have a great guest. It's Darryn Epp. Darryn Epp is a super talented wildlife photographer. He's a conservationist. He's a philosopher. Just a really sharp guy and a great podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the Avery Adventures podcast. I'm Ryan Avery.
And I'm Tanya Avery.
Today on the show we have Darryn Epp. He's a hunter, photographer, conservationist, philosopher. Welcome to the show, Darryn.
Hi, I'm doing well, thank you.
Are all those true? It seems like all those are true looking at what you're doing online.
Well, I'm more active now than ever for sure, and I definitely enjoy that part. I guess it allows me to reach out to people. I enjoy that part.
Yeah, it seems like you really enjoy the photography part. It looks like if you're watching the video, it looks like you're coming from us from a outbuilding in the middle of nowhere. What are you doing? Where are you at?
I'm actually an inspector doing a plant shutdown at the moment up in northern Alberta at a oil sand site where we have open pit mining of oil, and this particular place that I'm at produces about 220,000 barrels a day, and we're just in the process of going into a plant shutdown where we're going to fix all the things that need fixed and inspect a bunch of things that require regulatory inspection. So I'm in my camp room at the moment. I got a day off. I'm currently on a 6-in-1 schedule, and going to be that way till probably the 1st of November-ish.
What does that mean, a 6-in-1 schedule?
On 6 days and then off 1 day, just because that's regulatory.
That's what I thought you probably meant, and I was hoping it wasn't.
Well, I'm doing actually 4 shifts of that and then 24 days straight until we get to the end. So hopefully I can survive. It's the whole photography thing is what gets me balanced from this kind of a lifestyle in terms of work. So I'm going to miss it a lot. I took off 4 days. Typically I'm on a 14 days on and 14 days off schedule. So that's a really good work-life balance, and that allows me to do a lot of this photography that I enjoy, and going out and meeting people in the photography world and beyond. And but this is going to definitely stretch my sanity.
I can bet. Did you have any hunts planned that this messed up, or any photo shoots planned that it's messed up?
Hunting for sure. I have a Labrador that just loves to bird hunt. So to miss that opportunity this time of year is really painful. Um, Whether both upland or migratory birds. Sheep obviously is this time of year for us in Alberta, so having to work now is missing out on that whole opportunity. Photography wise, it's prime time right now for elk, and that's really painful to miss. Most of the other stuff I can catch up on later, but elk is hard to miss this time of year because it's a lot of fun.
So, what kind of camera do you use?
Well, I don't have a single camera. It's kind of the same as trying to have one vehicle that does all the work.
Or backpack?
Yeah, exactly. Same thing. Exactly the same. You can't buy a gas economy vehicle and expect to haul a camper with it or this sort of thing. So what I tend to have is a little bit of variety that I can use according to where I'm going or what I suspect I'm going to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to be mostly Canon oriented because I've over the years become more comfortable with it and enjoy its features in general. But I do have a Sony camera that's a A7R2, which is a fairly high megapixel kind of a landscape camera that I use when time or where space is a little bit more of an issue, space and weight. I was intending to use it more for a backpacking type alternative when I didn't have a lot of space and needed the quality to kind of go with it. But so I got three other Canon cameras. I've got their biggest pro camera, the 1DX2, which is the most current release, and it does the majority of the work I would say that I do with photography, with wildlife photography for sure. I do have both full frame cameras and crop cameras. It's maybe not something everybody understands in terms of what they mean, but they both have also different functions, places where they kind of excel.
Right. To back this up, if you guys don't know who Darryn Epp is, you need to go check out his Instagram page, and it's DARRYNEPP, because he's one of the best wildlife photographers out there, whether he claims to be or not. I'll put that out there for him. But I want to take it back to how did you begin this journey into photography? Because you don't get to the level you get by just walking out one day and say, shit, I'm going to take some pictures.
That was going to be my next question. Good job.
Yeah, how did it start, and how did it progress to where it is now?
It's almost kind of like that, though.
You're just that good, huh?
No, I don't know about that. But when you're passionate about something, it tends to show in results of some kind. You got to know what good looks like, and that helps. Same as the occupation that I'm in as a welder before being an inspector. If you don't know what good looks like, it's hard to achieve even through practice or whatever. So basically, when I was quite a bit younger, doing a lot of adventuring and stuff, my parents' relatives were definitely not into hunting outdoor lifestyle at all. So it was kind of me and a friend that I chose that was similar in kind of avenues of adventure that would go out and do all kinds of crazy things out in the woods and stuff. And we didn't take a lot of photos of it to start with, but my dad did have some cameras around because him and my mom did some portrait wedding photography kind of as a sideline when they were working. So my dad had some cameras around. I did pilfer one of them and put it through the paces, which I probably shouldn't have, but it did pretty well, and I mean, I protected as best as I could with the kind of adventures we we're going through. Ultimately, that was in the film days. That's a rough time because that's definitely learning the hard way, especially compared to the kind of equipment we have now, where you've got access to instant results. You just look at the back, you can see if you're overexposed, underexposed,
Right.
whatever. You definitely have a much better chance to learn as you go. In the film days, it was so hard to even practice enough because you always had to consider the development cost, and just there were so many things that were very difficult, especially as a self-learner. And that's basically where I'm at. I don't have any formal education in terms of photography. It's about just beginning to learn the concepts of what you're trying to accomplish, how you can make your tools accomplish that, and using them as best you can.
How far along in that progression did you think, man, I'm okay at this? I mean, I guess how far did you go until somebody said, hey, that's really good, I want to buy one of those?
Well, it's definitely become a lot more advanced, let's say, after the age of digital, where I could begin to both experiment with the camera itself and a little bit in the post processing. That's another tool that we have these days that we never had before. You can be not only touching up stuff that's not quite right, but you can also be creative with it in a way that you never could really before. So that gives us a little bit more latitude in terms of making kind of a unique statement in our work.
Right.
I guess some of it is kind of a natural flavor for um, what we're seeing, concepts and stuff. Often I can be driving along the road and look over and see whatever the way the light's hitting something in particular, and I go like, wow, I have to stop, or I have to turn around and capture that because it really appeals to me. It grabs me. So I think that's probably something that's kind of natural for most people, and it can grow obviously too, or you can try to teach it to people too. But I think some people it's very natural, and I guess in the last 2 or 3 years, people have started to say, well, yeah, you're pretty good with this or that or the other thing. And I don't like to think of it that way. I tend to try to be pretty humble, and I do it because I love it. So I try to kind of put that to the side and not get too worked up about it. But it's neat. I think for me, the best part of it is not necessarily the recognition, but more the outreach that I have because of it. I've done some really cool things in the last year, going to meet with people all over the place, and all because of connections through photography, with Facebook or Instagram or whatever, just meeting like-minded people and traveling and getting an opportunity for them to show me their cool backyard and kind of the stuff that they have that's unique that I typically don't see in a average week or 2 weeks around where I would tend to go myself. Like I just came back, the last full shift that I was off, I was up in Alaska for 10 days on an invite from a friend up there that I'd never met before, a Facebook friend, and we went and pre-scouted some doll sheep for his wife's tag that she drew. And the time before that, or a couple times before that, I was down in Wyoming meeting up with a lady there that was doing a bunch of outdoor photography at kind of a different pace, different level, different style. So yeah, just all over the place, just enjoying the heck out of that for sure.
Yeah, you're very humble because when I look at your stuff, I'm like, how in the hell did they get that picture? And how in the hell did he get that lighting? Especially in the woods, because it's easy, and I suck all the way around at taking pictures, but it's easier for me to take a picture obviously at my house than it is in the woods with the lighting, the background, the sun, the clouds. So you're being very humble. But on that note, what is your favorite? If you could only Darryn could only take one picture of one animal for the rest of his life, what animal is it?
That's cruel. You know, I don't know. You followed stuff on Instagram and Facebook long enough to realize that I'm very well rounded that way. I don't just take pictures of wildlife. I take pictures of everything, and I enjoy the everything part of it. I encourage people that are developing their skills as wildlife photographers to make sure that they're also looking at the rest of the cool wild world around them, because there's so much to take advantage of. I mean, we spend when we chase wildlife, we're in their backyard a lot. We tend to focus on times when they're the most spectacular, of course. But one animal, I really like mountain animals for sure. Sheep are probably what I'm most known for. I do spend a lot of time with sheep. I support fairly actively the Wild Sheep Foundation, the Alberta chapter, the BC chapter, and the national people. They use my images a fair amount for promotions, to communicate to people and to create enthusiasm, and I appreciate that part. I like to share, so that's probably why I do it more than anything. I like when people get excited about our wildlife, especially interesting animals like mountain animals that exist in habitats that are crazy.
Right.
That's I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think there's been a lot of discussion in the last couple of years about conservation, and people are always wanting to know, well, what group should I join? And I think that that's a personal choice for everybody, but it's so hard for a lot of people to differentiate, what groups really are giving back the most and what groups are just all about the hype. And so it's really interesting to me to hear other people, what their choice of conservation groups that they dedicate their time and money to, because it's really hard for a lot of people unless they invest a lot of time into researching it, and then you really still never know what.
Yeah, I hear you there for sure. I've always, I mean, I've seen several of the groups, and I really do have a partiality to some of the stuff, the general, I guess, the family type atmosphere that we get with Wild Sheep Foundation specifically. But there are certainly some good conservation-minded groups like Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation for sure. They really hold the standard quite high as well. So yeah, I'm partial. I like mountain animals a lot, so mountain atmospheres a lot. So wild sheep is definitely where I tend to hang my hat most of the time.
Have they used any of your photos?
Well, yeah, they tend to use them quite a bit with their online promotions. Last year, actually, at the show, they had a fairly good sized sheep image on there, just about everywhere.
Why would they not? I mean, those are amazing pictures, and that's great that you're able to give them pictures that they can use for promotions, because it definitely draws you in.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You also before we jumped on, you talked about the Rocky Mountain Goat Alliance. I think that's an up and coming organization. Can you shed any light on that, on what their direction is?
Yeah, they're quite educationally oriented at the moment. They don't fill quite the same genre that wild sheep does. Wild sheep, because there's more species, tends to be a little bit more elaborate, more, how would you say, it grabs a greater population, I think, more than anything. Goats are kind of a little unsung hero type of an animal that has some very unique challenges, primarily in hunting, because the influence that we can have a lot of times with the animal gender that we harvest tends to be significant, especially on a situation like goats, where their sexual maturity is a little bit later and their proliferation is a little bit slower in general. The fact alone that it's very difficult to select a gender when you're out field judging animals is probably the greatest challenge, and probably the greatest area where the Goat Alliance has tried to help people to make good judgments, tell them when not to select an animal because they're not sure enough. They just actually released a really good video here in the last 2 weeks that was actually in the making for 2 or 3 years. And Stephen Ranella did the voiceover for it, and it's just an excellent educational video. Something everybody should check into for sure. It's interested in goat hunting or just goat conservation in general.
Is there any overlap from the wild sheep for goats, or are they just simply all sheep? I'm pretty ignorant on that side.
No overlap technically, although I think that they've blended their efforts together. Peter, the president of the Goat Alliance, is quite involved with the Sheep Foundation as well. They do share, I think, some administrative duties now. So they're kind of very complementary, though they are separate organizations. They do bounce ideas off each other to get good processes and movement forward and stuff.
Pete from Stone Glacier, he's the one that started the Rocky Mountain Goat Alliance, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. He's a real trooper, that man.
Yeah, I didn't know. I was reading something where they were getting guys to go actually count goats, I think in Oregon a while back, and in southern Idaho, which is pretty cool. I had no idea. So the information's not getting out. So yeah, people need to go check out the Rocky Mountain Goat Alliance.
Yeah, they've got a lot of good efforts. I was involved in one last year down in Idaho, in the Frank Church Wilderness there. I spent 2 or 3 days with Pete himself up doing a goat survey there, and I think, even in that particular project that we're on, there was some information created that they had done surveys like 12 years in a row or 12 years apart, like 3 times or something, and just didn't have good data. Goat wasn't enough of a priority in that area to create that money base to do flights and stuff. So I think just the ability of this team of people, volunteers, to go out and do what they love to start with, and put some good impacts back into that conservation, education, information movement is it's really priceless, and people get involved. It helps people too. The people that want to have a conservation impact.
Are the actual Fish and Game entities listening to those count numbers and adjusting their harvests accordingly, or has that taken hold yet?
Yeah, I really suspect so. I know that Peter gets involved very closely with those organizations or those affiliations, and they're almost always involved in the counts themselves. They create the areas that they want to do surveys in, and then they end up collecting that data or using that data, probably aligning for future efforts to reassess or reevaluate. It sounded like in that particular case down in the Frank Church, they were going to actually potentially put in some hunting potential drops because of that effort that we had down there.
Nice. That's glad to see it. We're actually working and them working hand in hand. That's cool.
Yeah.
The other question I have to say, being a Canadian, I'm sure you have an opinion on the trophy grizzly bears from BC. Can you give us your side of the story on that and what you think should be done?
Ooh, that's a difficult one.
Yeah, it is. It is.
It grieves me that it has come to that status, though it doesn't surprise me at all. I did have an opportunity probably 4 years ago to hunt grizzly bears in BC. It kind of came totally by accident. I had a friend in the media industry that had a friend that was an outfitter that had an outfit in BC there and just bought into it. We were going to see whether that particular zone would support a spring hunt because it was a very low access area, very poor access. And typically any of the other hunting that they did in that zone was done with a float plane into certain backcountry lakes and stuff. So we over the period of 2 years, 3 individual efforts, I finally did harvest a grizzly bear. It didn't end up being in the spring because we basically decided that it was not feasible given that area. The access was just too poor to justify that kind of an effort. We were at the very end of the season, like June 15th area, and still had 6 to 9 feet of snow in some of the passes that we were trying to forge into there. So it just didn't seem reasonable, especially as a paid hunter situation. So anyways, I did end up harvesting a grizzly there, so I do have kind of a perspective in that way for that scenario. Though I'm a photographer and I love photographing bears and anything, and I just love spending time with bears because they're very unique creatures. I do still believe in sustainable harvest of any animals. I find it unfortunate that we as hunters have done a relatively poor job of communicating to the world at large value that we have and the influence, the positive influence we can have on animals, even like grizzly bears. I don't see them as different than elk or deer or really, for that matter, of Canadian geese or turkeys or whatever. They all sort of hold that same value to me as a conservation-minded person. So it's kind of painful to see a targeting of an animal that's clearly a very high-level predator. I mean, it holds a special place for me too, but it's hard to see it targeted specifically like that, knowing that it's not really a population problem why they've chosen to do that. It's clearly a political type, public opinion type based decision that they've made. I was though listening to a podcast just today from the Journal of Mountain Hunting, and Shane Mahoney was on there with his host and providing some really unique perspectives to that whole controversy and the fact that some of these discussions are a long time coming because the population in general hasn't been engaged in an outdoor flavor for a long time. They don't rely on hunting as a way of life, and they don't understand the sorts of bonding, both, I guess, from a wild perspective, the outdoor flavor that we tend to really appreciate as hunters and outdoors people, fishermen too. They don't get that. They're not tied into that. I mean, even for me as a photographer, a lot of the reasons why I photograph is I can't hunt all year round, and I need it to. With the job that I have, I'm pretty tied up mentally, and life can be somewhat burdensome as well. So it's a really good escape for me to kind of centralize, try to get a grip on myself again, and I use photography as a good method to do that. So I think we have a lot of distance to cover in this whole discussion about grizzly bears. I mean, you're in the same boat down south, and with the delisting process happening right now as well. I try to engage a lot of people on both sides of the fence. I think photography also gives me kind of that an ability for people to find me, to discuss things with me, because it's not all from a hunting perspective.
Yeah,
Part of it's
they don't see you as a threat of a pure hunter,
and sometimes don't realize that I'm a hunter, even though
that too.
Although I do try to throw a flavor of that in once in a while, just to make sure that people get it, but not in an aggressive manner, not blood dripping from my mouth kind of thing, where it threatens people, and you can't communicate with people that are threatened. So,
have you ever found that after people realize or find out that you hunt, that their attitude towards you has changed, even though you've had a good, dialogue up to that point?
I think generally a respectful nature gives you an opportunity. It's very rare that I come into a state where somebody, to be honest with you, the thing is almost weird, but I don't think I've ever had a death threat, which we see quite common amongst the hunting community and people that stand out.
We have.
Actually, with each other some days.
Yeah,
but I mean, other people too. They get in on it.
Yeah, awesome. But I don't know if I count that as a blessing or the fact that I may be too subtle. I try not to be in people's faces about it, because I don't think that's what our intent is. Our intent is to enjoy our lifestyle the way we feel is appropriate and responsible in our habitat that we're encroaching into. But I think we have a real opportunity, and I use that as one of my tools. Photography is a tool for me to engage people. It's quite interesting, actually. Sometimes, like in the parks here, when we sometimes go in the early season for bears and stuff, I'm often rubbing shoulders with people that are clearly not hunters or support hunting in any way, and I take the opportunity a lot of times to engage conversations about hunting and help them to understand a less desirable side from their perspective. And it usually turns out okay. I mean, you don't always end up agreeing with each other or whatever, but it gives them opportunity to see another perspective. And that's, I guess, my hope.
And they probably think about it later, as they're thinking over the conversation. And I think it does make an impact in the positive, because the next conversation or the one after that they might have with somebody, it makes them even more open to the subject.
And it's twofold. I mean, I come away learning something, and even if it's to be more sensitive to the perspective of somebody else, because clearly the perspective of the non-hunting majority is going to have a great influence on our ability to hunt in the future.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and right now, at this day and age, as you well know, there's no middle ground. It's left or right. You're with us or you're against us, and there needs to be a little more peacekeeping in the middle. And I think that's where you're great, where you could come in, you have a camera, you're doing the same thing as non-hunters doing, or maybe anti-hunter, but you guys have something in common that can start that conversation.
Yeah, it's true appreciation for what's out there.
Right.
And most hunters are like that too. And most people that are non-hunters, maybe not most people, some people that are non-hunters are definitely anti-hunters, tend to not see the perspective that hunters have, and to really understand that appreciation that we have as hunters. Clearly, we're not all on the same level either as hunters. We progress through hunting in our own mature rate of maturity. We tend to start off in a much different way in our younger years than we end off. Some people never progress that much. Some people progress a lot and come up with a much wiser perspective of what we do and how important it is to the future communities of people. So I enjoy that influence.
I gotta know, how do you when you're taking the pictures, how do you bring up hunting, or how does it come into the fold, those conversations?
Well, with let's say, for instance, with bears, I mean, they're not always active. So, you've got, let's call it, dozens of people converged on an area. They know where certain bears might be. So they hang around and they converse with each other just in general, talk about the life, or, a lot of these people are pretty common users of the park. They tend, I go there and I tend to know most of these people already. They're very common, or they're there a lot. So you have a lot of opportunities to talk about stuff like that. Yeah, for sure. Just while you're waiting for something to happen.
So have you noticed that some of the people you've seen over and over again, you're kind of shunned out of the group, or are they pretty accepting?
No, I think in general, if you're not, aggressive or disrespectful, I think we can, even the way we choose to talk about things, if it's not so one-sided, I think it really helps if you're truly trying to understand people's perspective.
Right.
It helps them to realize it's not mine or yours. It's ours, and we have to work together to get to that goal of protecting stuff.
Gotcha.
Though it is kind of interesting for them to try to. It's hard to communicate a lot of times why we enjoy what we enjoy, because it doesn't always make sense. For me to take photos of a grand or grizzly bear, magnificent species like it is, and go and shoot one at another opportunity, it's hard to wrap, or sometimes even hard for me to wrap my head around. I must say that before I did go to hunt grizzly bears, I had to really grasp it myself. So
right.
I can understand their perspective. So if we can kind of put ourselves into that place to understand their perspective, to try to help communicate what our real feeling is probably a key to success that way.
Right. Yeah, and I think that gets lost in the shuffle, and us hunters are not very good at explaining it. I hate seeing wolves chase down game animals. I hate seeing bears attacking fawns. And people think from the hunting aspect that we're just bloodthirsty killers, and that I hate seeing animals suffer, period. And we need to explain our side a little better, I believe.
Well, and I was dressing this a little bit just in the last couple of days with an Instagram post, a guy that was quite aggressively flavored towards anti-hunting, though claimed to be a hunter. Had a lot of things to say about that, and I'm going to take a couple more days to regurgitate or get into what he was trying to say there. But I think it sounds to me like it's kind of like a fairy tale type perspective. Him putting down hunters because we're using all these fancy equipment. We're not capable to be true hunters anymore because we're using all this stuff and shooting long range and all this stuff. I think that I think he's lost a little perspective on the reality of wildlife itself. It's not a fairy tale world out there. There's a lot of infants. What's that word? sadism or whatever with bears killing bears,
Cannibalism.
yeah, that sort of stuff. I mean, it's just not. It's not a fairy tale world out there. It's a beautiful world, but it's harsh. It can be very harsh. It's real, and most of those people tend to forget or not be exposed to that, I guess.
Right.
And they see our nature to hunt as only a bloodthirsty type, self gratifying goal.
Right, and there's a lot to that. You take it back to the Bomars that use the spear on the bear up there in Canada, and people say that's barbaric, and then you have the people saying we have too much technology. I think that a lot of those people, they're just uneducated, and they need to do a little reading.
Yeah, yeah, or experiencing it for themselves. I think that's really something that unfortunately our society is kind of torn away from. Clearly, this whole trend in BC there to communicate to the government that grizzly bears should be not hunted anymore. A lot of that comes from very urban type populations that are quite large. So they certainly have a great influence, yet their exposure to the reality of wildlife or habitat stuff is very limited. I think that's reality for us these days.
On that bear note, was it a fact of the anti-hunters just simply made more noise than the hunters? I'm not exactly totally educated on that whole thing that went down, but how did that go from having a bear tag, having a bear hunting, and the science backing up that there's enough bears to harvest to not even having a bear harvest or bear hunt?
Well, it's certainly progressed over a large number of years. Even the 4 or 5 years ago that I did do a hunt, I didn't know for sure that I would get to hunt because there was enough noise then. It's been politically steered. The previous government in BC was a Liberal government that did support the science-based approach of managing bears. Currently, this present year, that political party changed through a kind of a strong arm manipulation. Liberal Party did win, but in a very close battle with the new Democratic Party, and the third party was the Green Party, and there was some way politically that the Green and New Democratic Party could join forces to strong arm the Liberal Party out. Kind of a last second attempt to overthrow the government that did get the most vote. So the part of the political platform of the New Democratic Party was to use the poll numbers that they had conscrewed at the time, that showed that the majority of the people didn't prefer to have grizzly bear hunting. They used that as part of the flow to make what's happened now a reality, supposedly for November. So there'll be a fall hunt again this year, but according to that determination that they've made to follow through on their party platform, they're going to eliminate bear hunting in one particular zone along the west coast in the Great Bear Rainforest out there. And then through a very weird policy, they're intending to try and muddle the mid-ground on that by saying that you can hunt bears in BC, grizzly bears specifically, and but you can't take any what they would claim to be trophy parts. So you can go out and hunt bears. You have to bring the meat home with you, but you can't take the hide, the head, the claw. You can't take that with you.
That's really the law?
That's what their intent is, yeah. So they want to turn it into a meat only situation, no trophy aspect to it, to try to satisfy the demands of some of their electorate, and therefore end up wasting, part of a very precious animal to start with. So it's kind of I don't know how long term that kind of judgment will ever be, unfortunately, because it's not a good policy one way or the other. It's trying to satisfy both sides at the same time, I suspect, and not doing a very good job of it.
I guess I didn't know that was the trophy aspect of what that means. When you say that, it doesn't even seem logical.
Exactly. Yeah. So potentially you could go out there if you were very trophy minded, and this is some of the things that because even the Green Party doesn't totally agree with the policy that's been outlaid by the NDP party. When they're together, they have to be together in order to have this majority, but they don't even agree together because they see that as wasteful as well, which it is. I mean, it
absolutely
makes really no sense. It's meant to sway hunters from hunting in general of grizzly bears, but ultimately what could happen, even for non-residents, you could go with your guide and hunt a grizzly bear. You could go and take your trophy photos of it, and then take your meat, or have the outfitter do whatever they needed to do with the meat to make it legal, and then leave your hide and head in the bush, which is almost hard to fathom.
No, I guess just when you said that, that dumbfounds me. I don't even know what to say. That is simply trying to get people not to kill bears. I mean, there's no other way around it.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, and this is a really good lesson in political sway. Hopefully that this is a really good lesson for you guys down in the States too, with your progression through the delisting of grizzly bears, that it's a complicated issue, and there's a lot of people that get to vote on our use of hunting as a tool to conserve or deal with populations of any animals, and that it can go this way. It's not a given. We don't naturally get this opportunity. It's kind of a treat that we have to protect, and have to realize that this potential exists of these kind of laws in place.
Well, what would you tell the Canadian sportsman that wants to get involved now that this has happened? What did you tell him to do? How can his voice be heard? How would you get involved?
Boy, that's a tough one. I know that this gentleman that was on that podcast, Shane Mahoney, is a very strong advocate for all conservation of all species, and some of the things that he said kind of almost go against our first thought of this. And I think one of the things that set out most in my mind about his perspective on it is that we have to stop as hunters to say that we're conservationists, yet the only thing we focus on is game animals. We don't tend to value animals or speak out for animals that aren't game based, that we utilize, that ones that are in peril as well, but don't have a voice, kind of thing. We need to start showing that we're really conservationists and not just walking the talk and not walking the walk, sort of thing. I think that's probably what we need to do in a longer perspective. This may happen, and it might last only a couple of years. It might change in terms of its wording and stuff. I know that like now in Alberta, we haven't had a grizzly bear hunt in quite a number of years, based on delicacies in population in general. We don't have quite the same dynamics in habitat that BC has, but certainly a lot of it is political in nature, and we have to understand that that's the reality of our day and age. And try better as sports people to show people that we care, not just say that we care. and show otherwise.
Right, we're bad. We're very bad communicators. Very passionate, but
Mm.
very bad at communicating that passion. What?
Well,
Yeah, we tend to be very conservative.
I think the problem is we have to basically prove to the other side that we do care and that we're conservationists, whereas they don't actually have, they don't have to do their due diligence, excuse me. They can just say, you guys are wrong. And it's like the burden of proof is on us to have to prove that we're more than just bloodthirsty hunters and that we actually do care about the species that we're hunting. So we have to be the bigger person, I guess you could say, and go that extra step to prove that we do care, whereas the other side doesn't. And I think that's a little frustrating to a lot of people. Like, well, why do we have to do all this stuff when we the hunters spend the money for the trails and the parks, and and it's like, well, because that's just the way it is. And the sooner you embrace that and work towards the better goal, I think it's going to just be a lot easier. But we do have the burden of proof on us to do that.
Well, I think a lot of times the population in general doesn't even really understand the fact that we carry the biggest part of the burden,
Absolutely.
just because of the model that's been created in North America in general, based on really good forward thinking of some of the administrators back in that time. So I think the more they understand, the more we help to communicate those kinds of things. It maybe help people a little bit to understand the impact that we've been trying to have in history as well.
Oh, sure, absolutely. I mean, unless you put the time into research it, you wouldn't realize that if you are a non-hunter. But just in the aspect of that, we have to prove that we're evolved, I guess, and that we're just not out to hunt to kill things and display trophies on our wall. I think is even a bigger burden to have to prove to people, because you have to show that before people will even be opening to hearing your argument.
I think that's one of the neat natures of the photography part of it, is it gives this platform to cross those barriers a little bit better and communicate to people.
Absolutely.
Shows them kind of a multifaceted or multi-level interest and concern and passion, I guess.
Yeah, that's the first thing that jumps out when I see your stuff is you can cross that bridge where a lot of hunters, twofold, they don't have the talent that you have to take the pictures, and we're too damn stubborn to take that step. And I think more of us need to take that step and start engaging with the non-hunters. The anti-hunters are going to do what they're going to do. It's the non-hunters, obviously. You hear it over and over again. They're the people that are going to decide whether this happens or it doesn't happen. And I think we need to start taking that extra step to explain our side and get more people involved.
And it's neat to see some fairly large companies embracing that same flavor too, even in their advertising communication style, to bring more relativity to the event of hunting instead of the hunt itself, more the flavor of the journey rather than always the trophy itself. It creates a different perspective, one that people can embrace regardless of whether they're hunter or not.
No, that's a great point. That we stress that a lot with, invest in companies that give back, that show the side of hunting that you are passionate about, because it makes a difference.
Yeah, some of them really stand out these days. That Sitka and Yeti and a lot of those companies are really trying very hard to create that different perspective.
Yeah, and I'd say First Light's another one. First Light's really trying to push the journey, not necessarily the kill, which I think helps.
Yeah.
What do you think? I can post pictures on Rockslide. I can post pictures on Avery Adventures of deer and elk that have been killed, and nothing really seems to come. But if I post one dead bear or one dead wolf, I can guarantee the antis will all show up. What do you think triggers that emotion? Is it they're soft and cuddly when they're cubs and pups, or what do you think triggers that in the anti-hunters, that they feel they need to come and tell me they're going to kill me or somebody in my family for posting that stuff?
It's weird. It's like it's almost like they have more of a personal type personality, more of a human type characteristic. Anytime you travel through the parks or anywhere, it's always the bears along the side of the roads that create the most interest, the most tragic bear jams and all this stuff. People have an incredible fascination for bears and wolves, and for whatever reason, and I almost think a lot of, I mean, it's partially sensationalized by our society, but at the same time, there are some really human-like characteristics that they tend to have. I had a really interesting incident last year in the spring, photographing grizzly bears, where there was a mating pair that had just got together a couple of days before I was out there, and they were going through the dance the whole time I was there, and it was just incredible, the images that I was able to get during that day or two period that they were first together and kind of almost in an intimate nature towards each other. They almost like they blocked out the whole world, and they were just dancing the whole time. And you know, we can't help but look at that and kind of think humanly about it. And
Right.
you truly don't. I mean, animals, regardless of what they are, don't think the same way humans do. I mean, even like our dogs and stuff, we love them as much as we do. We think that they have great feelings and stuff, but when you train dogs, you realize that certain things motivate animals and some things just don't work because they aren't like human beings. So I think humans, unfortunately, see animals in a different way than they should because they aren't humans and they don't respond like humans do. And bears and wolves and stuff just seem to have that place in people's impression that creates this strange, you know, when we kill them or use conservation or population management of any kind, they just can't quite grasp that, I guess.
Right. Yeah, they're polarizing. You can kill 50 fish and you're cool, but you kill one bear and you're a bastard.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you know, when I usually do try to communicate in some way, a lot of times I will use a bear or bear hunting event to try to stimulate that conversation because I know it is on the edge of that acceptance.
Right.
But I try to do it in a flavorful enough way that it's not aggressive or cruel or you know, kind of distasteful.
Right.
But at the same time, trying to, you know, motivate or engage people to you know, communicate what they feel and why they feel it, and you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I guess we kind of beat that conservation thing to death, which is good. But getting back on the lighter side, on the photography side, Sony or Canon?
It's kind of like we spoke about just before the things kicked off here. You can never really have one flavor. If you're kind of, you know, trying to take pictures of everything, it's certainly you can't buy one vehicle to do all jobs. You can't buy a fishing rod that does everything well, or a gun or whatever. So for the most part, for me, wildlife related, I'm a Canon guy. It's something that fits my flavor the best, fits the need of technicality the best for me. I do own a Sony. I use it in a different way. I use it mostly for landscape stuff, or it's a smaller package, lighter package that I would typically use for a backpack situation where I didn't have room for a full-size camera or lenses and stuff. So in general, I don't like to say one or the other. I know I have lots of friends that have Nikon stuff, and I poke them all the time just because it's fun. But each person has their own preference for stuff. But for me, a full-size camera for wildlife is definitely the best solution. You need speed. Wildlife is something that you need to capitalize on low light conditions most of the time, and you need frame rate to get all those little details between movements and stuff that make or break the best shot.
So which model though? Because we'll get asked, of both cameras do you have?
Well,
of the
I
Sony
actually,
and Canon.
yeah, I actually have 3 currently Canon bodies. The one I use the most is the 1DX2, which is their flagship model. A little bit out of the range of most people in terms of money, but where it shines for my type of work is that it's got really good ISO performance, which is basically the sensitivity of the sensor. So I can really push the lower light situations and come up with images that are quite printable. Resolution is high enough. It also gives me a really high frame rate. It's 14 frames per second, so it's the one I typically use. It's really heavy too, so in combination with the lens that I usually use, it's like 12 or 14 pounds. So it's not practical for some things.
Good Lord.
Yeah, exactly, like your gun.
What advice would you tell the budding wildlife photographer? What advice, tips, tactics? Don't do this, do this. Just a general advice, I guess.
I'll go twofold on that. Equipment-wise, I would say make sure that you look very closely in your budget at glass. Same as we do when we're hunting. Glass is a very critical portion of what we do because it makes or breaks what you can see. Images are probably 90% of the images is created by the glass in between the sensor and the subject. So that's certainly something that I would recommend, is make sure that you put enough priority on what you select for lenses, because we can lose perspective in buying a better camera and just having the typical store cheapy lenses that the kit lenses basically that come with them, that people think, ooh, I've got a 25 or a 55 to 250 or something millimeter lens, and it's great. I mean, but most of the time they're not up to that level. From the other side, I would say most people don't understand the functions of a camera, the capabilities of the camera.
Me.
And there's really 3 basic things that we can control in the camera. Digital wise anyways, we didn't have so much latitude in the film days, but in current digital age, we have a lot of flexibility with ISO, which is that sensitivity of the sensor, and the aperture, which is the opening of the lens iris, very similar to our eyes, the amount of light that it lets in, and its relation to shutter speed. So between those 3 things, we have an impact on all of those things, and it gives us the ability to manipulate what we produce in our photo. Let's say creating most of the time for a wildlife image where you're fairly close, you're creating a portrait type shot. If you create this element of very thin focus where there's just a very small portion of that whole depth of field that's in focus, it really helps you to sensationalize your image. So we can create that, or we can enhance that by adjusting our camera appropriately. And knowing those capabilities of it and knowing where the limitations are in terms of light, capabilities of the camera compared to the light as it's available in a day, we can really start to progress beyond put it in auto mode kind of thing and hope for the best.
Yeah.
That's a good explanation. This is the $1 million question I always see, and I get asked, and I get seen it on Rockslide. I see it all over. Is there for a not a beginner, but an intermediate photographer, a guy that goes hunting a lot, is there a point and shoot that can do a lot of the features in a lighter platform that'll take good, say, landscape, good grip and grins, just good, I guess, camping pictures? I'm rambling, but you get the gist.
Yeah, there's certainly some stuff that fills the void fairly well. Again, it's a matter of how much reach you want, and that's where kind of that determining line is. All of them fit kind of into that point and shoot category, but there's some that are called super zooms that kind of have that 400 to 600 millimeter capability built into them, so you can reach out to create those wildlife type images where you're trying to reach far enough for it to actually mean something. There's a few of those that are actually quite amazing. They're certainly still than some of the typical point and shoots where you have maybe 3 to 5 times zoom or stuff. I know that Aaron and a lot of the guys that have discussed some of those smaller point and shoot Sonys got really good results out of those, and I haven't really used one myself, but I know there are several models in the Sony line that do well there. For that super zoom line, I understand, and I've recommended a few of the Panasonics that really do excel, have fairly fast lenses in terms of aperture capability. So yeah, there's certainly lots of good options in that mid-range or medium application. You still have to understand the camera. That's kind of what I'm trying to communicate as much as I can to most people, is that as soon as you learn what it's capable of, you're also understanding what it's not capable of. So you're not let down by expecting something that's not capable of.
How many PMs you get on that a day?
Quite a bit, actually. Quite a bit. It's actually surprising, and I can't always give good recommendations on a specific camera, but you can kind of lead people to at least consider some things that they're not educated enough at that point to understand.
Right.
So you can steer them in the right direction at least, even if you don't give them a specific. I mean, technology changes every day. If you recommend a certain camera one day, 2 weeks later there'll be something else that's way cooler and way better. So it's the flavor of the day.
I was also going to ask you, Darryn, do you do weddings?
Are you getting
I have been coerced into doing some, but it's something I'm really trying hard to stay away from.
I know, I just had to mess with you.
No, it's a good question, actually. It's something that I've done a little bit, not on purpose though, never on purpose, and I do okay because I understand the concepts, but manipulating people isn't something I do very well. So if I have to set something up, move people into it, and people are never satisfied with most stuff, and I prefer to stay away from that as much as possible, unless I can do candid stuff. I enjoy that part. I enjoy being in the shadows looming and taking the cool pictures of people interacting and stuff like that. That I can do, but the setting people up and making them look terrific is not my deal.
We just had a family friend take senior pictures of our son, and she said very clearly, I usually do landscapes. This is a favor for you, and you only... She was very clear about the fact that she did not, this was not her forte, and she did an amazing job. But it cracks me up because some people people just have their preference because it's what they know.
And it's usually those people that have the skills, but they're not necessarily good at interacting enough with people to create that magic, I guess you could say.
Right.
That's hard to get out of people. That takes a special skill in itself, is to really make people shine.
Yeah.
Well, last question, Darryn. I'm trying to get a movement going to invade Canada. What's your thoughts on that?
Were you
I don't think we got enough.
invade him, or?
I don't think we got enough money for a wall, so I think you're pretty.
I tell all my Canadian friends that, man, we need to invade Canada, man. We need to get up there and hunt some of those sheep.
Yeah.
They don't find it amusing, but yet he keeps telling them that.
All right,
we're pretty placid as Canadians, so.
Oh, you guys got that socialized medicine, right? It's working for you.
You bet. Yeah.
Where can people find you, Darryn?
Well, just about any time you plug my name into Google, it comes up with one of the 3 locations that I'm available. Either I have a website, though it's way behind I work full time, so it's kind of way behind all of my Instagram or Facebook posts. So probably the best places to see current stuff and kind of catch the flavor of who I am and what I've been doing is most often on Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah, your Instagram is next level, and that's
Yeah.
Before I even knew you, Aaron's like, check this guy out. He's a next level photographer, and I would agree. You may be humble, but I'll put it out there. If you're not one of the best for wildlife photographer that I know of.
So
I appreciate that.
Just kidding, Darryn.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on your show.
All right. Thanks for listening. And as always, check us out at averyadventures.com and on YouTube at Avery Adventures. Thanks.